We humans are clearly animals, biologically speaking, and so it makes sense that if one wants to know about human development, a biological approach should not be forgotten. In developmental psychology, the relevant biology is of course that which influences the development of our behavior and other psychologically interesting phenomena. I will discuss concepts related to them here. I will begin by discussing genetics, heritability, and twin studies. Next, I will explain the concept of temperament. I will then discuss the development of the brain and why that matters for learning. I will then focus on infancy, pointing out some of the most important developments during the very first years of a person's life. Lastly, I will quickly go over the most important physical developments a person will go through from childhood to old age. My name is Jouni Vilkka, and this is my channel, TFF, Teacher from Finland. You want to click the subscribe button, so do it. A gene is a functionally connected section of DNA. For example, it could determine the color of your eyes, or a combination of genes could cause you to suffer from an inheritable disease. Many psychological features are also more or less genetically inherited. Humans and chimpanzees share 85% or more of their DNA, so we are very closely related to them. This means studying chimps might be useful even for understanding human psychology, to some extent. The genetic similarity between any two humans is about 99.9%, meaning that when discussing genetic differences between humans, it is the remaining 0.1% we are talking about, not the whole DNA. Heritability is an estimate of how much genes influence the individual differences between individuals in a population. For example, one's height is a highly heritable characteristic, with heritability about 80 to 90%. That means most of the differences in height between people are due to genetics, although not quite all. The heritability of intelligence, or at least the IQ score, is only about 50%. So environmental factors explain as much of the differences in intelligence between individuals as do genetics. It is important to remember that this is a statistical measure and cannot be applied to an individual, only a population. It cannot tell you how much of your intelligence, for example, is caused by your genes, and how much is due to some environmental factors. A genotype is an individual's genetic inheritance. All the genes the individual in question has inherited from their biological parents. Half of it comes from the mother, the other half from the father. The genetic similarity between siblings is thus the same as that between a child and their parent, on average. A phenotype is what develops from the interplay of the genotype and its environment, the unique individual. Identical twins share the same genotype, but they will have different environments, even if raised together. For example, they will have different experiences and perhaps a different set of friends, and so on. Epigenetic factors mediate the interaction between the environment and the genes of an individual. They influence how the DNA code is being read in biological processes, affecting how actively a given gene functions within a cell. It is not only affected by physical things like toxins, but also by things like the care a baby receives. This can epigenetically influence the development of the stress management system of the child. While the genes remain the same throughout one's life, the environment will change, so how the genes function may also change. The interaction between the genes and the environment can be seen in little babies, which already influence their environment by babbling, making pleasant baby sounds that cajole others to interact with them. This will improve the baby's social skills. On the other hand, an irritable baby will cry easily and will be considered difficult. This leads to less positive attention. This way, genetic differences can lead to cumulative effects. This is the Matthew effect I explained previously. Another unpleasant example of the gene-environment interaction was found in a study concerning a gene called MAOA, which is connected to the inhibition of aggression. The researchers discovered that the level of mistreatment of boys in childhood correlated with their level of violent and antisocial behavior in young adulthood. But they also found that the effect was much stronger in those individuals who had a relatively inactive MAOA gene. They were almost 10 times more likely to be convicted of violent crime. The point is that a gene, or its absence, alone does not lead to certain behavior or even a trait, nor does the environment alone. These things occur as the result of the interaction of the genes with the environment. The same goes for personality traits and I guess just about everything. We are not merely being acted on by our environment, because we also affect that environment actively. Even babies in some ways create their environment. If they like cuddling, they smile when cuddled, which is likely to increase cuddling, and those that don't like it will squirm and maybe cry to reduce the amount of cuddling they will receive. As people grow up, they will select their environments, choosing those that play to their strengths. They will probably choose hobbies they are good at and will encounter and befriend like-minded people doing those hobbies. The environment, for example the culture, will influence the individual's behavior by rewarding or penalizing certain behaviors. These norms can be seen in expressions of aggression or gender roles, among others. Twin studies are important for studying the role of genes in psychological phenomena. This is possible because identical monozygotic twins share the genome, as I mentioned, but in some cases have been raised separately. Comparing such twins to twins who have been raised together can reveal interesting statistical correlations, for example related to personality traits, IQ, propensity for depression, and so on. Identical twins reared together are even more similar to each other than those raised apart, which shows the influence of the environment. The similarity of identical twins raised apart compared to others, of course, shows the influence of genes. Fraternal, dizygotic twins and other siblings are also used in similar studies, but they are not as useful due to the lesser similarity of their DNA. It has been found that genes explain between 50 and 70% of the differences in IQ between individuals, and between 40 and 60% of the differences in Big Five personality traits, depending on the trait. This does not mean that 50% of your personality trait is caused by your genes, by the way. It is important to understand that the genetic heritability of traits applies to populations, and even then only to a particular population in a particular environment at a particular time. The point is that the concept cannot be applied to individuals. I should note that it is rare that one gene alone causes a trait. Usually traits are polygenic, requiring the functioning of several genes to produce. Especially complex things will not be reducible to a single gene. For example, there is no gene of intelligence. If you want to learn more about genetics, I suggest you study biology. I will not go deeper into that subject. Temperament in psychology refers to the biological basis of an individual's personality. It is innate and guides our behavior as babies, already before we have an actual personality. Thus, it is highly important for the interactions with our environment and has a strong influence on what kind of personality we develop. Temperament has a lot of influence on how well we fit in school and how well we get along with others. There are, of course, several theories of temperament, but the common theories at present see aspects of temperament similarly. For example, Alexander Thomas and Stella Chess distinguish 9 different temperament characteristics, each of which is a continuum, where especially high or low scores may be cause for concern. The characteristics include things like activity. How much does the baby move and is it difficult to keep it still? Rhythmicity or regularity. How regularly the baby eats and sleeps. Mood. Is the baby mostly happy? Initial reaction. How the baby reacts to new people or situations. Does it withdraw or approach them? Distractibility. How easily is the baby distracted by stimuli? And attention span. How long can the baby persist in a specific activity before turning to other things? What is perhaps the most important thing about temperament for the well-being and good development of the child is not their own temperament alone, but rather the compatibility of their temperament with that of the primary caregiver, typically mother. If the mother finds their child difficult to deal with, it will make interactions with the child strained or otherwise suboptimal. An easy child is much more pleasant to be around and interact with. There are also cultural preferences about temperament. In the US, being shy or reserved is seen as a problem, while for the Chinese it is a sign of high social intelligence and being considerate, which is a laudable feature. Cultural values influence the way parents and others then interact with children, trying to direct them toward the right kind of behavior. To some extent, the children will probably adapt to the social expectations, but they can also lead to problems like having a negative self-image or feeling stifled. During pregnancy, nerve cells are generated in the brain of the fetus, which then migrate to their places, forming neural networks with other nerve cells. The brain develops in specific order from lower structures like the brain stem to the cortex on the top. The sensory and motor cortex and other areas necessary for basic functions that are necessary for functioning and surviving outside the womb, develop before areas needed for speech. The anatomical development, that is, development of the structures, already occurs during pregnancy, but the physiological or functional development takes place after birth. The brain of a neonate, a newborn baby, weighs about 350 grams or 0.77 pounds, and that of a 1-year-old about 1 kilogram, which is more than 2 pounds. An adult's brain only weighs about half a kilogram. This may seem odd. After all, the adult's body is much bigger than a child's, and it would seem that growing up would mean growing heavier in mass as well. But in the case of the brain, this is not the case. The increase in mass is caused by myelinization and the increase in the number of dendrites. These structures were explained in the Introduction to Psychology, in case you want to refresh your memory. Link below. The newborn baby's brain creates a huge amount of unnecessary connections between neurons with dendrites, the branches for incoming signals in a neuron. And apparently an important part of early learning involves the elimination of unnecessary connections and also unnecessary neurons themselves. This process is called pruning. Also, Even though an adult brain has more of the axons of the neurons covered in myelin, because that speeds up the signaling of the cell, and the myelin adds to the weight of the whole brain, this pruning means that the more efficiently functioning adult brain is lighter than a small child's brain. The most important feature of the brain is its adaptability, called plasticity. Some neurons are created in the brain throughout life, but only some. Most of the plasticity, which is necessary for learning, is due to changes in the connections between neurons. Not only are some connections discarded, the ones that are used a lot become stronger and faster. Humans, unlike most other animals, have very few forms of instinctive behavior. Instead, we are born pretty helpless, but have a tremendous ability to learn new skills and adapt to new environments, and this continues throughout our lives. Even if we suffer brain damage as adults, our brains may be able to learn to cope with the situation by having some areas of the brain take up new functions. This should not be overemphasized, though, because this ability is limited. If the damage is suffered at a very early age, when the ability of the brain to rewire itself is very good, the prognosis will also be better. An adult suffering similar damage will be worse off because they already have fewer cells to begin with, so the damage is going to be more harmful, and the ability to grow new connections between neurons will also no longer be at its best. I already previously mentioned the critical period and the sensitive period. These are due to the development of the brain. The brain is sort of expecting the right kinds of stimuli at certain stages of development, and so that is when they should be provided. Without them, the brain will not be able to develop properly, and the skill, like first language, and therefore conceptual thinking, will not be properly learned. It is pretty common knowledge that a developing fetus is particularly vulnerable to toxins, and especially the mother's habits of smoking tobacco and drinking alcohol, not to mention other drug abuse, seriously endanger the healthy development of the fetus. The toxins can enter the bloodstream of the fetus through the placenta. The mother may also be suffering from a disease, and either the disease itself or the medicine used to treat it can cause the fetus to be adversely affected. The newborn child may also contract the disease itself during pregnancy or birth. Issues with mental health that the parents, especially the mother, are suffering from may also affect the newborn baby. Infants, rather interestingly, have some reflexes that adults no longer have. For example, sucking for nutrition, as well as diving, seems to be instinctive for them. The latter explains how it is possible for infants to learn to swim, even underwater, before they can even walk. Infants also learn very rapidly. You may be aware that they are asleep most of the time, about 20 hours a day. This is connected to learning, and it would be a good idea to remember through the rest of your life that sleep is necessary for learning in two ways. One, being rested makes it possible to focus on practicing. Two, the new information or skills you have learned become embedded in your brain during sleep. So, especially if you are studying, don't skip sleeping. In fact, naps can be useful even for learning. A baby is so helpless that it has to learn what kind of body it is, where the limbs are and what they can do. A parent's touch helps with this. A lot of stimuli and repetition is required to learn motor skills. It is possible to help infants learn some basic skills like walking, but so much of it is about biological development especially of the muscles and nerves, that it cannot be hastened that much. Apparently, the Kipsigis tribe in Kenya start teaching their babies to stand and walk soon after birth, but they still learn to walk only about 2 weeks sooner than typical Westerners on average. Moving and controlling the body are motor skills. Gross motor skills, like standing up and using the big muscles, are obviously learned first, and the development of fine motor skills can only occur after that. The latter means small, accurate movements, like using the pincer grip to pick up and hold objects, made possible by our opposable thumbs. As the motor skills develop, the baby becomes more aware of its own behavior and how it can affect its environment, including other people. This helps it to also develop cognitively. For example, it can grasp object permanence. Object permanence is the understanding that an object does not cease to exist just because you can't see it. An infant learns this at the age of 2 or 3 months. They begin to understand words before they are 1 year old. Toddlers at 1 or 2 years of age begin to walk or toddle and to speak. At about 3 years of age, the child begins to leave the baby age. They develop imagination, problem-solving skills, express their thoughts verbally, and become aware of the expectations of others and begin to adapt to them. When children start to go to school, they also, somewhat unfortunately, begin to compare themselves to others. At an early age, physical motor skills are important in this. In my experience, children don't seem to understand that a difference of almost a year in age is already very significant, and so 2 kids in the same class can have very different skill levels or abilities in physical activities. It seems that even teachers don't quite understand this. This can lead a younger child to develop poor self-esteem because slightly older kids are able to do things better than they can. Learning new skills often requires the advice and support of adults. They can provide a scaffolding to enable the child to perform at a level higher than their own actual skill level. This so-called zone of proximal development, ZPD, can thus be used to improve the skills as well as knowledge effectively. The scaffolding in question doesn't have to be actually physical, but it can be. For example, a coach can use their hand as a support for a child learning to do a cartwheel or even a flip. Step by step, the support can become weaker until it is no longer required. During adolescence, the body develops rapidly and in some cases almost too fast, causing some clumsiness. Those changes can also have social influence and affect mental health. Later, teens reach their peak in muscle growth and general athletic abilities because of improved coordination. Practicing physical skills and exercising in adolescence is very good for increasing muscle mass and bone density, which are much harder to develop in adulthood. Learning to break falls at this age would also be a very good idea, because that skill could become a lifesaver in later life. Learning a visual art or to play an instrument is also still possible due to improved dexterity, and I think it would be probably beneficial in providing a way of expressing emotions, thus promoting long-term mental health. Of course, there are many demands and little time, so decisions have to be made, and teenagers are too young to make such decisions for themselves. They still need adults to guide, motivate, and to some extent decide for them. It is common for people, especially those who have just reached their 20s, to look down on teenagers because adolescence seems to be the most stupid and annoying age in human life. One of the reasons for this is that adolescents are very eager to take stupid risks. It has been suggested that this is due to increased pleasure-seeking behavior. The developing brain of a youngster is strongly influenced by its reward system, finding pleasure highly gratifying, while simultaneously having a poorly developed executive function, the ability to rationally guide and especially inhibit behavior. At this age, social influence brings more gratification than at other ages, so risk-taking can be used to gain social approval, causing pleasure. This connection is quickly learned, causing more risk-taking behavior. Another possible explanation is that the reward system of a young person requires stronger stimuli than at other ages, so the strong sensations related to the risk can in themselves cause pleasure. How easily someone can be talked into taking stupid risks depends on how developed their executive function is. During adulthood, we sadly begin to lose our ability to recover from physical exertion and to lose muscle mass. By age 40, growing muscle mass becomes difficult, and merely trying to maintain it requires a significant amount of working out. Because recovery times also become longer, this means having to choose between spending a lot of time at the gym or losing one's physical abilities. Again, this can affect one's mental well-being. The senses typically also begin to get worse. For example, the eyes can no longer adapt to looking at different distances easily. It is typical that varifocal glasses are needed, or at least reading glasses. Adulthood is the longest part of life, and in most ways, middle age is the best stage in most individuals' development, despite having a really bad reputation. Old age tends to make people more fragile due to losses of both muscle mass and bone density. This increases the likelihood of dangerously falling down, which is especially likely in winter in Finland. The risk for this is enhanced by the weakening of balance as one ages. Thus, a simple fall can cause serious fractures. Yet, not going outside is an even greater risk for both mental and physical health. Luckily, there are devices like rollers or walkers that can be used to assist walking. On average, people can now expect to live healthy lives significantly longer than just a few generations ago, and the importance of brain health has become a pressing issue. In older age, the production of neurotransmitters slows down, and other changes begin to occur in the brain. Even the mass of the brain begins to shrink. The risk of Alzheimer's disease and other brain diseases grows higher. Very recently, it was discovered that there is a big change going on in Finland in the common causes of death. Heart and vascular diseases are becoming less common, while brain diseases are taking the highest place on the list of causes of death. All aging societies likely share similar problems. I do hope you found this lecture on physical development interesting. Thank you for watching. Next time I will discuss something that might sound a bit weird: the development of the self. I hope to see you back on my channel then. Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.